Good evening, everyone. Um, Nice to be with you again. It's been a couple years since I did one of these talks. Um, my name's Peggy Hurley. I'm a master naturalist from Tioga County, which is where Arnott Forest is. I'm about 10 minutes from there. So that's always convenient for me. I'm also a retired family physician. I've done a few different things over the years. I did emergency room medicine when I first started, and then I did uh, family medicine and have done some international stuff. I did Doctors Without Borders for a little while in Sudan and did a Himalayan healthcare in Sudan, or I mean in Nepal. And then most recently, I worked at Cornell. So I did college health and took care of the students and did some teaching. So the other thing I really like to do is backpack. I was talking to Christy about this before I got started. The picture that you see here is Old Loggers Path in Bradford County, Pennsylvania. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that, but that's my favorite place to do a loop backpacking trip. And I saw this photo. I'm like, yes, it really feels like fall now. So I thought we'd start out with that. So the topic tonight is, I like to call it a tick talk. Um, I hear a lot when I'm outside with people doing different activities outside, and they're concerned about ticks. And sometimes I worry that people are so concerned about ticks that they won't be able to get outside because they're fearful of it. And the first talk I did was called The Health Benefits of Nature. That was the presentation I did last time. And we know that there are proven health benefits, but one of the things that can kind of negate that health benefit is if you're afraid when you're outside. So, like someone who's afraid of snakes, or in this case, there's so many people that are afraid of ticks. So I just wanted to provide some information, some science-based information about the true risk of ticks and what we can do to mitigate that risk. Um, so we're going to use science. Being in medicine, I always kind of try to answer questions based on what the data and the research shows. So we're going to try to do that and get rid of some of those myths that are out there, look at some data, and most importantly, what I'd like you to get out of this is things that you can do to reduce your risk. So we're going to do this as a Jeopardy game. I don't know if you guys are fans of Jeopardy. I hated Jeopardy because I'm really bad at like facts and things like that, but I know it was very popular. So, and I just happened to pull up this slide. So we're going to do tick talk, not tech talk. Our category is going to be TikTok, and you master naturalists from New York are going to be the contestants. So the rules for this game, if you could make sure that you put your questions in the chat because I would really like to have a discussion about some of the things we're going to talk about. So feel free to put in as many questions. If you want to keep your own score, that's great. Sometimes it's helpful because, some of the myths, some of us believe, some of us don't. And so it'd be interesting to see how many things how you answer the questions. And you win an hour of Master Naturalist training tonight. So that's the grand prize. All right, so question number one. Lyme disease is caused by a bacteria called Borrelia burgdorferi. True or false? I'll give you a couple minutes to jot your answer down. I did this for a different organization, and I had someone who played the Jeopardy song for me in between each question, but I couldn't figure out how to do that. So, da, 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 da. Okay. All right. So the answer to that is true. Um, a lot of people, are learning, about the kind of the names, but It still tends to be, oh, it's Lyme disease. But the disease itself, even though you get it from a tick, the disease itself is caused by a bacteria, and it's called Borrelia burgdorferi. Um, that part's relatively straightforward, but in terms of tick-related illness, it's very complicated because there's so many different types of ticks. So you've all heard of the deer tick, or it's also called the black-legged tick. But there's many different types of ticks. There's many different types of infectious agents that they carry. So Lyme disease is caused by Borrelia burgdorferi. Um, Ehrlichiosis is caused by a Ehrlichia bacteria. So there's many different things. And then it can cause all different kinds of illnesses. So sometimes I think people just think ticks and Lyme, but it can be a lot more in depth than that. So it's not always so clear cut. And I think sometimes people compare, oh, I had this and I had this, and my doctor did this and my doctor did that. But there's a lot of nuances in terms of why you may get one test and somebody else gets a different test. So every lecture I've ever gone to, they show this tick life cycle. Um, I think it's not important to totally get it because I think it's kind of complicated myself. But the important thing is that in the life cycle of a deer tick, there's the eggs, there's the larvae, there's the nymph, and there's an adult. All of those, except the eggs, so the larva, the nymph, and the adult, can bite animals, including us. And in order for that organism to move to the next life stage, so in order for a larva to grow up to become a nymph, it has to take what's called a blood meal. A blood meal is it bites you and it basically sucks your blood. Um, and that allows it to live to go to the next cycle. Each of those organisms, the larva, the nymph, and the adult, tend to like different hosts. So can you see my little pointer when I do that, Christy? Okay. So the larvae actually feed on birds, mice, and the most common thing you hear about is the white-footed mouse. That's one of its favorite things to bite. But even the larva, which is about the size of a poppy seed, can also feed on these other things, including us. So you can imagine if you have a tiny poppy seed in your armpit, there's a good chance that you're not going to see it because it's so small. So the larva bites one of these, and then over the course of the rest of the summer, the fall, and the winter, it turns into a nymph. The nymph is about the size of a sesame seed. So that's also pretty small and easy to miss. And the nymph also feeds on these things. Um, the nymphs are known for being voracious feeders. So they tend to be the ones that are really going to spread Borrelia burgdorferi around. And then once that nymph takes a blood meal, it goes around, and now we're into the second year and grows up into an adult. And then the adult bites a deer or you or me or a raccoon or fox, or as there's 49, let's see, 31 species of mammals that larval and nymph black-legged ticks will bite. So they have lots of things to pick from, but they still seem to like us a lot too. Even with birds, there's 49 different species of birds that they've been known to infect. So let me see here, go back here. So that's why it's complicated to know what we can do as far as how to control ticks, because it's so dependent on the life cycle, what they're biting, where they are, et cetera, which we're going to talk some more about as we go on. The most common tick is the black-legged tick, which most people know as a deer tick, also called Ixodes scapularis. And it acts as a vector for organisms which can cause, so number one, Lyme disease. A vector is something that transmits an infectious organism from one organism to another. So example would be a deer, a white-tailed deer has Borrelia in its system. The tick bites it, the tick has Borrelia, and then the tick bites you. So the tick is the vector. So besides spreading Lyme disease, black-legged tick, which is very common, can also cause anaplasmosis, babebiosis, and those are becoming more common. The rare ones that you might hear about are ehrlichiosis, Borrelio myomato disease, and Powassan virus. So unfortunately, it's not just Lyme disease that we need to be concerned about if we're bit by a tick. And it's not just the black-legged tick that we have to be concerned about. So these are some of the other ticks that are out there that can cause disease. These are not as common in our area, but they are in our area and they can cause other diseases as well as Lyme disease. And then in other parts of the country, there's also other types of ticks that can also cause things that we have here, but also things that are rare here, like Colorado tick fever, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, those kind of things. So it's a big cast of characters out there. And it's important that we know that it can be complicated. Doesn't mean we can't do something about it to protect ourselves, though. So I'd like to focus on Lyme disease. That's the most common vector-borne illness in the United States and Europe. The most recent data that I found was that in 2023, there were roughly 89,000 cases reported to the CDC. And the caveat to that is that in 1922 or 2022, there was a new case definition, and that changed the numbers somewhat, and we're going to go into more detail with that. So here is 1995. Each one of those little dots is a county, represents a case in the county. And you can see that it was very much more concentrated in the Northeast, very few cases in other places. And then you have 2010. So things are getting darker and bluer. And then now 2023. And where we are is right in the thick of things. New York State is one of the higher places for Lyme disease. So question number 2, I'm going to ask you the question first, and then I'm going to give you a few little hints. Surveillance data shows that the number of Lyme disease cases are increasing. True or false? I want to quickly tell you what surveillance data is. So that's data that gets reported to local health departments, health departments, and then to the CDC. Because that data needs to be exact, they use what are called case definitions, and they're very complicated. And also they change over time. So when I was doing the talk, I was reviewing it and I thought, let me just look to see how the case definition for Lyme disease has changed since I've been in medicine, which was, I graduated medical school in 1988. There's been about 10 different case definitions over the years because as we've learned more, we've been able to clarify and make it more exact in terms of the disease and how it spreads and what causes it. And the more we learn, the more exact we can be in deciding how we're going to define a case. But that changes the numbers. Um, in terms of how the surveillance data goes in, it comes from doctors. So anytime a doctor diagnoses a case of Lyme disease, it needs to be reported to the state, and any positive lab tests get reported from the lab directly to the state. So, actually, I should have given you a chance to write that down, true or false. True, but it's kind of interesting because of this whole thing with the changing case definition. So this is the surveillance data for New York State. So if you look at the dates between 2013 and 2021, which I did, and I looked through the list of how many cases there were in New York State each of those years. The highest during that period was 5,155. The lowest during that period, and this is for annual cases, was 2,240. So in that case, you might say, well, that doesn't seem like cases are increasing. Then in 2022, the definition changed. And for the first time, because the laboratory tests have gotten so much better and more accurate, they said, well, we're going to change it to reflect that. And if you have a positive test, even though you don't remember getting bit by a tick, even though you don't feel that you were sick or had Lyme disease, if this one particular test, and there's a lot of different tests, is positive, we're going to count you as a case. So you can see why in 2022, even though the highest was 5,155 before, in 2022, the number of cases jumped up to 16,798. And 2023 went up to 22,173. So when people say, oh my God, Lyme disease is just exploding, it's going crazy, it's a little complicated. And it's just good to keep that in mind. So this is something that New York State does. It's called a tick score. And what they do is they go out, I don't know if they get grad students to do it or volunteer high school students, but they go out and they catch ticks and then they examine the ticks to see if they contain the organism that causes Lyme. So they're looking for Borrelia burgdorferi. And in this, what you're seeing up here is they're talking about the nymph. So they not only look for the tick, but they look to see, is it a nymph tick or is it a adult tick? So you can see, I don't know if we have any people that are from these areas down here, but for nymphs, a high percentage of the nymphs have Borrelia. We're kind of in the middle here in the Finger Lakes, and then the Adirondacks is on the lower side, which to me seemed a little strange just because there seems like there's so many deer and everything up here. But and then when you look at the adult ticks, it also changes. So here where I am and where Christy is and where some of you guys are, for adult black-legged ticks, the numbers are considered very high in this area. So I think the point of this is it changes based on whether you're looking at adults or nymphs, which is why it can be complicated because adults and nymphs are also around at different times of the year and also bite different things. So with all that information, let me ask you this, question number 3. The number of ticks overall is increasing, and that is why there are more cases of tick-related disease. True or false? False. So number of ticks doesn't necessarily equal number of cases of Lyme disease or number of cases of deer. So one study showed a stable deer tick population over the period from 1989 to 2022 in New York and New England. So that's a pretty long period of time that the deer tick population was stable, which kind of goes along with that other data that I just showed you from the CDC. However, the thing that did change was the percent of ticks who carry the organism. So the percentage of ticks that were actually carrying Borrelia burgdorferi has increased. And in some areas, as many as 50% of the ticks that were examined carried the bacteria that causes Lyme disease, as well as increases in ticks that they test for the organism that causes anaplasmosis and babebiosis. And nationally, those two things have doubled in terms of the number of illnesses that are seen. Okay, we're up to question number 4. By reducing tick populations, you can reduce the number of tick-related diseases. So what do you think about that one? True or false? It's actually false. Seems like it would make sense if you got rid of some of the ticks, there'd be less Lyme disease. But they actually did a study. They took 2,700 people who were in, various households. Half of the households, they treated the area around their house with this acaricide, which is a pesticide type things that would kill ticks. And it did result in 63% fewer ticks around the yard. However, there was no difference in the number of attached ticks in the two groups. So both groups, the ones who had 63% fewer ticks in their yard versus the ones who had the same number of ticks, reported 17% of those people reported that they'd had a tick in the last 4 months. And of the people who reported the tick, 3% reported an illness they thought was Lyme disease, and then 1.5% had medically verified Lyme disease. So basically, it didn't matter if there were fewer ticks around their yard. Both groups had the same number of history of attached ticks and the same amount of Lyme disease. Okay, question 5. Reducing local deer populations will decrease the incidence of Lyme disease in those areas. So we can't get rid of the ticks and hope that's going to do it. What about if we get rid of the deer? Is that going to help reduce Lyme disease? True or false? False. Most likely false based on the research. In terms of why, maybe it has to do with the fact that adult ticks feed on deer, but the ones that really cause the most Lyme disease are the larval and the nymphal ticks, which mostly feed on small mammals and rodents, but they don't feed on deer. Adult ticks, which are the ones that feed on the deer, are bigger. So most of the time we see those and we flick them off or pull them off. The larval and nymphal ticks are so small that it's very easy for you to not even know that you had a tick attached, and it dies and falls off and you never knew you had one. And they're the ones, they don't really tend to feed on deer as much as they do the small mammals and birds and mice. And most people who get Lyme don't even remember having had a tick bite. So the people who see a tick and pull it off are much less likely to get Lyme disease than people who never even knew they had a tick. They just get sick and don't know why. Okay, so question number 6, the bacteria that causes Lyme disease, which we now know is Borrelia burgdorferi, was first identified in the 80s, the 90s, or the 2000s? Wake up, Pete. I feel like I'm boring you. I can only see a couple people's faces, but you're one of the faces I've seen. Um, so the answer is the 1980s. A lot of people, I think, feel that Lyme is a relatively new disease, but it really isn't in terms of uh, our lifetimes. It's been around. It was first described in Lyme, Connecticut. That's where the name comes from in 1982. And the way they discovered it was doctors were seeing all these young children who had arthritis. Well, the most likely thing you think of with a child with arthritis is juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, but the cases were much higher than they would have expected. So they started looking into it more and doing tests and looking under the microscope. And eventually they realized that it was not juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, it was arthritis that was being caused by this bacteria. Um, the first time I saw a patient with Lyme disease was in 1988. I was a fourth year medical student. And it's interesting when some new disease comes out, it's not unusual for the medical students to learn about it before the practicing physicians learn about it because, they're seeing patients and they're not reading maybe necessarily all the newest journals and they're not being taught by this doctor who specializes in this or that. So luckily I had just learned about Lyme disease. I went in to see a patient, came back out, and my professor said, "So what do you think it is?" And I said, "I think it's Lyme disease. It looks like erythema migrans." And well, it hadn't even kind of made it out into the mainstream medical literature. So that was really good timing for me. And it made me look really good. But it was totally coincidental that we had just learned about it the day before. Um, So since then, the amount of information that we've learned about Lyme disease has just exploded, as well as other tick-borne diseases. Question number 7. Lyme disease has been a reportable disease. So as I was talking about doctors and labs having to report it since the 80s, the 90s, or the 2000s. Actually, since 1991. So since then, because it became a reportable disease, we've actually been able to learn a lot about what it is, how to diagnose it, how to treat it, and how to prevent it. And treatment is very effective. It's just that sometimes the symptoms are slow to go away. And also, many people don't get treated because they don't know that they have it. On the other side of it is that as we've learned more about it, there's also been what people have called the epidemic of pseudo Lyme disease. So um, it's definitely can be overdiagnosed, and it definitely can be something that um, you have to be sure that the person that you're seeing is actually trained and scientifically based in what they're doing. Because, for example, Lyme disease centers where they kind of are like, okay, if you have Lyme disease, but nobody can figure it out or whatever, you go to this Lyme disease center. Only half of the people that were sent there actually turned out to have Lyme disease. And also post-treatment Lyme disease is an area where they're doing a lot of research right now. Question number 8. If you find a tick attached to your skin, you will probably get Lyme disease. True or false? False. I think most people, they find a tick. I mean, it's kind of icky, creepy, crawly. Ooh, it's on me. I gotta pull it out. But not only that, but then there's the worry, are you going to get Lyme disease? There's many, many different things that affect whether that bite is going to give you Lyme disease. such as how long it was attached, was the tick engorged, what kind of tick was it? Was it a black-legged tick? Was it a Lone Star tick? Was it a dog tick? Was it an adult or was it a nymph tick? And was it carrying anything infectious? You don't know that by looking at it, but not all ticks are infected with anything. And where did the bite occur? Did it occur where 50% of the ticks carry Borrelia burgdorferi, or did it occur somewhere where, a low number of ticks carry it? Overall, the rate of Lyme disease for a person bitten by a tick, which has been attached at least 36 hours, is about 1 to 3%. And that's a kind of number that came up in a few different things that I read. So I think that's a relatively accurate number. One of the biggest things is how long the tick is attached. And for Lyme disease, so for Borrelia burgdorferi, if you get that tick off, if you remove it within 36 hours, the risk of you getting Lyme disease is almost zero. Also, if it's not engorged, it's very low. Also, if it's an adult, it's much lower, that risk that you're going to get Lyme disease. So, and also where you are. Are you in the part of New York State where it's very high case rates? Question number 9, you find an attached tick. What is the first thing you should do? Contact your doctor, safely remove the tick, look on the internet to see what you should do, or call Tick Busters. All right, so the answer is safely remove the tick as quickly as possible. So by safely, what we mean is wash your hands, wash the area, use tweezers to grab the tick right down where the tick is attached to your skin and pull it straight back. If you don't have tweezers, and this is kind of how I feel personally. If you're in the middle of nowhere and you don't have any tweezers and you have a tick, you're gonna have to use your fingernails. Just pull it out, wash your hands after. I mean, not everybody has tweezers on them. And the length of time that tick is there is so important in terms of your risk that you really want to get it out as soon as you can. One of the newer illnesses, Powassan virus, that's transmitted by ticks, it can transmit the virus within 15 minutes of biting you, as opposed to Lyme disease, which usually takes about 48 hours. And also, I read that it's sort of like a linear progression. So if you are bit by a tick that has Borrelia and you happen to see it within a half hour and you take it out, you're a much lower risk for someone who sees it at 36 hours and takes it out. So even a half hour either way can make a difference. So as soon as you see it, take it out. Once the tick is gone, it can't transmit it any further, even if there's little tiny mouth parts in there. So back in the olden days, we were taught that you had to get the whole tick out, and so we'd pull it and the little mouth parts would be there, and then we'd be dinging around in the person's skin trying to get the head out. And what the problem with that is you end up causing more problems, and there's no reason to do it. So if you are at home and you see a tick and you were just outside and you go, oh, I'm going to pull this off, and you pull it off and there's a little tiny bit, don't worry about it. Just keep an eye on it, but you don't have to call your doctor and go get it dug out of your skin. One of the things that's happening now is you'll see laboratories saying, you get to pick a tick and you want to know if you're going to get Lyme disease, send it to us and we'll tell you if it's infected. Don't do it. It costs a lot and it doesn't change anything in terms of how you would be treated, because we don't know. First of all, just because it had Borrelia burgdorferi doesn't mean it gave it to you. So it's really more important to just take a picture of the tick. If you don't know for sure that it's a black-legged tick, which once you've seen a few, and you can see pictures on the internet of what they look like. If you're not sure what it is, just take a picture of it in case down the road something happens and you need to know what kind of tick bit you. But you don't need to send it to be tested for infection. Question number 10, your doctor should always order a blood test to determine if you have Lyme disease. True or false? False, actually. So ordering a blood test is not always necessary. Um, and probably, actually, let me skip right down to this one right here. The reason is it's not always necessary is that there's a specific type of rash that occurs in early Lyme disease that's called erythema migrans. And if the person has a classic erythema migrans rash, that's all you need to know to make the diagnosis. So even if, you came and saw me and you gave a history, you were out in the woods, you found a tick, you don't know how long it was on, you pull it off, and 5 days later you have a rash that starts out as a red bump and then expands into a circle. And it needs to be at least over 5 centimeters to meet the criteria for erythema migrans. If you have that, you don't need a blood test. You do need to be treated, but you don't need a blood test. And the other reason, as far as blood tests, they're very complex. So it can get very complicated. There's false positives, false negatives. The tests sometimes don't tell you if it's recent or past. So testing has gotten incredibly complicated. And if it's a question of really not knowing for sure what's going on, you want to go to somebody that really knows all the nuances of all the different tests. But if it's straightforward, you have erythema migrans, you're in an endemic area, you had exposure, that's pretty easy. Question number 11. Climate change is causing the tick-related disease to increase. So can we blame all this on climate change? True or false? True, but when I read about this, one of the things that, sorry. One of the things that I found was that, yes, global warming is good for ticks because spring comes earlier, the summers are longer, the winters are more mild, and they're increasing their range. They're going more northward as it gets warmer, but ticks like it moist. So actually, some of the droughts that we're having is actually negatively impacting the deer tick population. So it's actually lowering deer tick levels. Um, and it's complicated based, if you remember that little circle of the tick cycle, the weather conditions one year are going to affect the ticks a year or two down the road because of them having like a 2-year life cycle. So it can get pretty complex, but I think the consensus is overall that global warming is letting the ticks, get do their thing and cause the disease to be spread. Question 12. Ticks play a vital role in our ecosystem by providing food to amphibians, reptiles, and birds, and by controlling wild animal populations. True or false? True. So as much as ticks are unpleasant and not good for our health, they are important to our environment and our ecosystem. And it's not their fault that they happen to pick up a disease that's going to make us sick. So, in my view, it's up to us to do everything we can to reduce the risk of getting sick from the ticks. So, question 13, and this is our last question. Which of these actions can reduce the risk of Lyme disease? So if you want to just take a look at those and just see which one of those you think can reduce your risk of Lyme disease. Well, you probably figured this out, but actually all of them reduce your risk of Lyme disease. So by doing even one of those or all of those, you can really, really reduce your risk. And you may have questions about why, I've had people say, well, why does having your hair in a ponytail decrease your risk? Well, if you think about it, most ticks are at ground level or maybe 12 inches above because they're hanging onto plants. So if you have long hair and you're in your garden and you're over like this and your hair's hanging down, the ticks can attach to your hair. So most of them, if you think about them, the putting it in the dryer, it used to be that they said you should wash your clothes when you come in, but then they figured out that it wasn't the washing that was killing the ticks. It was actually the heat of the dryer that was killing the ticks. The shower or bathing afterwards was that guideline has been around a long time, and that really can make a big difference. Probably because first of all, you're looking at your body. Also, maybe it's rinsing it off. If you scrub, you might be loosening the tick. So there's a lot of things that we can do that, aren't that hard to do to reduce our risk. So basically, um, as I said, do them all, do them one, but don't let ticks prevent you from getting out in nature. If you have to be out in nature because it's your job, know that you can do things, that are going to help you protect you. So I'd be happy to answer any questions, any comments people want to make, or if you have any personal experiences with ticks or Lyme disease or any of that, be happy to hear about it.
Thank you, Peggy. I'm going to read the questions in the chat first, and then we can open it up for personal experiences, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Okay, I'm just going to see what's in there. Um, Somebody asked, so Tom asked, can you be positive and never have the target rash, the bullseye rash?
Yes, yes. Not everybody gets the rash. Uh,
Okay.
and sometimes people just don't notice the rash. If it's in an area, under your arm or, your backside, you just might not see it. But um, if it's there and if it's a characteristic rash, which it can get a little tricky because anybody that gets bit by a tick is probably going to get a red bump from it. And that's just a like more of an allergic type reaction to the tick. But that will be a slightly red or pink round rash, but less than 5 centimeters. And that isn't erythema migrans. Erythema migrans is a very characteristic rash um, that you once you've seen it or looked at pictures of it, you'll be able to tell the difference. There is when you're in the secondary disseminated phase, you can see multiple erythema migrans, and that's also, diagnostic. Um, but if you see that, that's considered diagnostic of Lyme disease. If you don't see it, it doesn't mean you don't have Lyme disease.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Chris had asked, curious why New Hampshire showed fewer cases on the 2023 map.
New Hampshire specifically as opposed to other places, you mean, or
I don't know. Chris,
I
would
don't,
you like to unmute and ask, clarify that?
There we go. Yeah, it actually, you could actually see the background. It wasn't completely covered with blue dots, wedged between Vermont and Maine. Like you couldn't even see state boundaries there, except New Hampshire stood out. You could actually see it.
uh-huh,
So that just struck me as really interesting. Maybe their criteria are different. It might be a reporting. I suspect it's a
right.
reporting difference, but just it popped out to me on that map.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know the answer, but I do know that many things can affect reporting. Um, I mean, every county and state should be using the same criteria, but that doesn't mean that they are or that they're all doing it to the same degree or whatever. Or maybe something happened. I mean, all kinds of things can affect it. Weather can affect it. If you think about if the like in the winter, if the winter's real cold, even though uh people still go out on warm days in the winter, if the winter's really and can get Lyme disease in the winter, if you have a really, really cold winter, not only are there going to be ticks less active, but people are less active, so you're not going out. So all kinds of different things. I don't know specifically, but you could try Googling it and see if you can find out.
Yeah, I
Pete
don't
asked,
trust Google anymore. So I
yeah.
find I do my own research.
Okay.
All right, thanks, Chris. Pete asks, how aware is the medical community of things like anaplasmosis and babesiosis?
That's a great question. Um, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I'd say not very aware. Now aware, very aware. So it used to be when someone came in with a history of a tick bite and an illness, it was pretty standard to do testing for Borrelia burgdorferi. Now the standard panel is done. So automatically anaplasmosis, babebiosis, Borrelia are checked right off the bat. Sometimes people also check, ehrlichiosis and Powassan virus. So those are very rare. But yeah, doctors are, I mean, should be, and I think most are very aware, and it's pretty standard to just check for those as well.
Okay. All right. Does anybody else have a question that was not answered or would like to unmute and ask a question or share something?
I would. I have two questions. One
Okay.
is the time of year when the larvae and the nymphs are most active would be when?
So the larva and the nymphs are most active in early spring, and then the larva is really like early spring, and then the nymphs come in and they're like spring into midsummer.
Right.
So, and what I've noticed personally, and I think it does have to do with global warming, because I'm out in my garden all the time. I have the woods around me, leaf litter. And it used to be I would start pulling ticks off or finding ticks in May. Now it's April
Mm,
and they're the tiny, tiny ones.
right, right,
Yeah, really the larva and the nymphs.
right.
And in most cases of Lyme disease that go on to develop into, you know, early or disseminated Lyme disease are from larvae or nymphs because they're hard to see.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
they're eating more. They're out there trying to get their blood meal,
right,
because if they don't get the blood meal, they die.
yeah. I one last question. I've also read. I wanted to check on the veracity of this, but I've read that ticks get a bad name, but an infected bird can give an uninfected tick the bacteria if the uninfected tick bites a bird that's infected.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
that's how it gets spread, right? So an adult uninfected deer tick bites a deer. Now it has, you know,
Right,
has
right.
Borrelia, and then it bites a human. But even
Well,
worse, or if you have a larval tick and then it bites someone, that person is going to have it, even
right,
without them having,
right,
you know,
right,
to go through the whole cycle.
right. So birds can give the bacteria to a tick too, right?
Right.
Birds. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Because they're taking a blood meal from that bird.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
And it does kill, deer don't seem to be affected. They don't seem to get sick from it, but small mammals can get sick from it. And so that's the one slide that said they're important to the ecosystem is because they do help control the small. So mice and small mammals will die sometimes from tick-related diseases. So that
Mm,
helps to keep that population from
right.
ballooning.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, thank you, Kate. Susan says, I'm puzzled by the study that showed reducing ticks in a specific area does not reduce likelihood of contracting Lyme. Any insights on why that is?
Uh, because so tell me which study you're talking about. So the one where they reduced the ticks with the acaricide
Yeah,
or
yeah,
okay. Yeah. Probably because, they reduced the tick population right around their house, but those people go other places. And it's kind of like when you're trying to reduce the deer population and you let people hunt on your property and right around your property, maybe there's fewer deer, but within 6 months, all the other deer that were in
right,
other
right,
places come to your property,
right.
kind of like that idea.
Right. So it's a good argument for not spraying your yard for ticks, but it's not actually saying that overall, if there were fewer ticks, there wouldn't be less Lyme.
Well, they haven't been able to prove that fewer ticks equals fewer cases of Lyme. And
Okay,
I don't know if that's just because there's so many ticks out there that even if there's fewer, there's still enough that to make us sick. I don't know necessarily the reason why, but there's no study that's shown a correlation that by getting rid of the ticks, you can reduce Lyme disease.
got it. Got it. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Susan. Okay, Colette asked, I have heard that opossums eat them. Is that fact or fiction?
Eat ticks?
Yes.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. There's a number of different things that eat ticks. Guinea hens apparently love ticks. So a lot of people get guinea hens for their yards just to eat the ticks.
Mhm. And Dave and Lori asked, can a tick pass Lyme to its offspring?
Uh, well, a tick wouldn't bite its offspring in terms of that. And that's how it's spread is with when they take a blood meal. As far as like if an adult tick has Borrelia and then they lay eggs, I don't think it's passed into the eggs. So for a tick to get Borrelia, it would, if it's an egg and it's a healthy egg and develops into a larva, it's that larva by biting another organism, like a mouse, for instance, that has the bacteria. That's how they get it. So they're getting it from the mouse because they're sucking the blood from a mouse that's infected. So I don't think you would be able to get it from your brother or sister or mother or father of a tick because you're not biting each other to get. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. All right, and Tim asks, what's the typical wait time of the year to still see ticks?
You can actually see ticks year round, even in the winter. They're still out there. They're not as active, but they even, I don't think that you can count on a freeze getting rid of ticks, maybe if we had a month of, below zero temperature, I'm sure that would decrease it, but ticks are active year round, and when they test for ticks, they and go out and try to, find them, they find them year round. So they're out there. They're just not, there's not as many, and they're not biting. And I guess in the winter people have more clothes on, and also we're not outside as much in the winter as we are in the summer.
All right, thank you. Well, that's the end of the questions in the chat box. We would have time for one more if anybody wants to ask one verbally. If not, Peggy, thank you so much for an excellent
Welcome.
presentation.
I just want to say one thing, Christy. Most of the data that I got came from CDC, New York State Health Department, and there's a lot of good information online about Lyme disease and other tick-related diseases and I would use those, I think, are the best sources.